Way A private room, low conversation, crystal glasses. A dinner that feels formal even before anyone speaks. Charles is there, Camilla is there, Diana sits opposite them perfectly composed. Then she reaches toward her left hand, removes the sapphire ring the world recognizes instantly, and places it on the polished surface between them. No shouting, no tears, just the small sound of metal against wood. In the version repeated online, everyone understands what Diana means before she says a word. The ring is no longer an ornament, it is evidence, a marriage in miniature. A blue stone surrounded by diamonds, beautiful enough for a fairy tale and heavy enough to carry everything that fairy tale had become. Then something happens that nobody at the table expects. It is an irresistible scene. There is only one problem. I cannot find reliable archival evidence that this exact confrontation happened. No authenticated contemporary report I found records Diana placing her engagement ring on a table in front of Charles and Camilla. No credible memoir passage I could verify establishes that precise dinner, that precise gesture, or a dramatic response immediately afterward, and that matters, because Diana's real story does not need invented furniture, invented dialogue, or invented confrontations to make it devastating. The documented ring story is stronger. It begins before the wedding, February 1981. Lady Diana Spencer was 19 when her engagement to the Prince of Wales was announced. She selected an oval blue sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds from Garrod. Unlike many royal engagement jewels, it was not a unique family heirloom created only for her. It was a design that could be ordered from the jeweller's catalogue. The ring nevertheless became inseparable from Diana's public image. At the engagement interview, the couple were asked whether they were in love. Diana answered immediately. Charles gave the answer that would follow them for decades. Whatever in love means, even without knowing anything that came later, the moment feels strange now. But hindsight can make every hesitation look prophetic, and history deserves more discipline than that. So hold the ring. Do not interpret it yet. Because while the public saw a sapphire, Diana was becoming aware of another piece of jewelry. A bracelet? In recordings made for Andrew Morton's biography, Diana described discovering that Charles had arranged a bracelet for Camilla Parker Bowles shortly before the wedding. The bracelet, associated in later accounts with the initials or nicknames F and G, became one of those small objects around which an enormous emotional reality gathered. Diana also later recalled Camilla linked photographs and cufflinks during the honeymoon. Diana was days away from marrying the heir to the throne. The wedding would be watched around the world, the dress was being prepared, the cathedral awaited, the machinery was already moving. And somewhere inside that machinery was a bracelet intended for another woman. This is where the myth of the ring on the table begins to make emotional sense. People want Diana to have produced one clean, decisive gesture. Take off the ring. Put it down, make everyone look. But that is not what the documented early story gives us. It gives us uncertainty. It gives us a 19-year-old woman approaching a wedding of almost unimaginable scale while already suspecting that another emotional bond existed inside the marriage she was about to enter. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. To Diana's later account, she considered not going through with the wedding. Her sisters reportedly told her it was too late, even joking that her face was already on the tea towels. That sentence is often repeated because it captures the trap perfectly. The wedding was no longer only two people deciding whether to marry, it had become an event, an institution, a national expectation, a story already printed, and the ring was part of the printing. On the 29th of July 1981, Diana married Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral. The royal family's official biography records the marriage and the public role that followed. Millions watched. The sapphire remained on her hand. That is important. She did not leave it behind. Not then. She wore it into the marriage. She wore the symbol even while the meaning underneath it was already unstable. The honeymoon did not settle the uncertainty. In recordings later used for Morton's biography, Diana recalled being preoccupied with Camilla. She described seeing photographs of Camilla fall from Charles's diary and noticing cufflinks connected to her. Whatever one concludes about every emotion Diana later attached to those memories, the recurring pattern is clear. Objects kept appearing. A bracelet, photographs, cufflinks, the ring. Royal marriages are discussed in terms of duty, succession, houses, titles, and protocol. But some of the most revealing parts of Diana's account are tiny enough to fit in a hand. That is why jewelry matters in this story. Jewelry survives when conversations disappear. It can be photographed. It can be worn in public while private relationships remain invisible, and it can say two different things at once. To the crowd, Diana's sapphire said princess. To Diana, over time, it may also have carried the history of a marriage she increasingly believed was not what the public had been told. We have to be careful here. That emotional meaning is interpretation. The documented fact is that Diana continued wearing her engagement ring even after the separation of Charles and Diana was announced in December 1992. Contemporary accounts and later jewelry histories note that the ring remained visible after the separation. Think about that. If this were a simple revenge story, the ring should have disappeared immediately. Marriage broken, ring removed, end of symbol. But Diana did not give history such a clean image. The royal family's own account records that Charles and Diana separated in December 1992, and that Diana continued her public role from Kensington Palace. Their divorce would not become final until 28 August 1996. During that long separation, the sapphire could still be seen. Why? There is no single authenticated statement from Diana that settles the question completely. Perhaps habit. Perhaps continuity. Perhaps concern for William and Harry. Perhaps because removing it publicly would itself become a headline. Perhaps because a ring can stop representing a husband and begin representing a chapter of one's own life. What matters is that the real Diana did not behave like the perfectly written character in viral stories. She was more complicated. She could know a marriage was failing and still wear its symbol. She could confront betrayal and still perform royal duty. She could resent the institution and still understand the power of her place inside it. She could want freedom without wanting her children to experience every rupture in public. Then came 1994. Charles gave a televised interview to Jonathan Dimbleby. Asked about fidelity, he said he had been faithful until, in his words, the marriage had become irretrievably broken down. The admission became one of the defining public moments in the collapse of the marriage. For Diana, the public balance shifted again. That same year came one of the most famous images of her life. The black off-the-shoulder dress, later nicknamed the revenge dress. Notice what happened. The ring did not become the decisive public object. Diana herself did. Clothing replaced jewelry as the language. She did not need to slam anything onto a table. She walked into public view. That is why the imagined confrontation with Charles and Camilla misunderstands Diana in an important way. Her most powerful responses were often not private theatrical gestures. They were acts of public authorship. She learnt how to use appearance, timing, interviews, and silence. She understood the camera. And by 1995, she understood something else. If other people were going to explain her marriage, she was prepared to explain it herself. On 20 November 1995, the BBC broadcast Diana's interview with Martin Bashir on Panorama. The methods Bashir used to secure that interview were later condemned after the independent Dyson investigation found serious deception in how access to Diana had been obtained. That fact belongs in any responsible account of the interview's history, but Diana's own words remain part of the historical record. Asked about Charles's relationship with Camilla, Diana delivered the sentence that eclipsed almost every jewel ever exchanged inside the marriage. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. No ring hitting a table could have made the point more clearly. 3 people, 1 marriage, crowded. That sentence is the real confrontation. Not because Charles and Camilla were sitting across from her when she said it. They were not. It was more consequential because millions of people were. The private suspicion had become public language. The woman once described through anonymous palace briefings and tabloid speculation had spoken in her own voice. This is where the title of our story changes meaning. Princess Diana left her ring on the table. Maybe not literally, but by 1995, symbolically, she was beginning to separate herself from what the ring had been supposed to guarantee: security, romance, belonging. A permanent place beside the future king. One by one, those promises had changed. Yet Diana's identity did not disappear with them. In December 1995, Queen Elizabeth II urged Charles and Diana to bring their separation to an end through divorce. Contemporary reporting documented the Queen's intervention. Negotiations followed. The divorce became final on the 28th of August 1996. Diana was no longer styled Her Royal Highness. She remained Diana, Princess of Wales, continued living at Kensington Palace, and continued sharing responsibility for William and Harry with Charles. The institution had changed her status, but status was not the same thing as significance. That distinction becomes visible when we return to the ring. After Diana's death in Paris on the 31st of August 1997, the sapphire did not vanish into a vault and become meaningless. The royal family records that Diana died following the Paris crash and that widespread public mourning followed. The ring became inheritance, it became memory. It eventually became part of the next generation's royal story. When Prince William proposed to Catherine Middleton in 2010, he gave her Diana's sapphire engagement ring. William explained publicly that using the ring was his way of ensuring that his mother did not miss out on the excitement of the occasion. Suddenly the object carried a different meaning again. In 1981, it had represented the beginning of Diana's royal marriage. In the 1990s, it remained visible through the breakdown of that marriage. After her death, it became a link between mother and son. then between Diana and a woman she never met. That is what objects do when people are gone. They outlive the argument. They change owners. They acquire new meanings. And this is why the fabricated image of Diana leaving the ring in front of Charles and Camilla is almost too small for the real story. It imagines that Diana's power came from rejecting a piece of jewelry in one dramatic moment. But Diana's actual transformation was slower, more painful, and more difficult to dismiss. She had entered the royal family as a teenager, whose image was immediately shaped by other people. By the end of her marriage, she had become one of the most recognizable women in the world and was openly disputing the story being told about her life. Not always perfectly, not without mistakes, not without contradictions, but in her own voice. That is the deeper reversal. The ring remained an object. Diana became an author, and Camilla. She eventually married Charles in 2005, 8 years after Diana's death. The story did not end with one woman winning and another losing. History moved forward in ways that remained uncomfortable for many who loved Diana. That discomfort is real, but it should not tempt us to manufacture scenes that satisfy it. There is enough verified history: the bracelet before the wedding, the honeymoon memories, the separation in 1992. Charles's admission, Diana's panorama interview, the divorce in 1996, the sapphire ring eventually returning to public view on Catherine's hand. These facts already form a devastating sequence. They also tell us something the invented dinner scene cannot. Diana did not need Charles and Camilla to witness her rejection for it to matter. Her transformation did not depend on their reaction. That is the trap in so many stories about her. They make her final power dependent on whether Charles looked shocked, whether Camilla went silent, whether the Queen intervened, whether a room froze. But perhaps Diana's most important achievement was reaching a point where their reaction no longer determined the meaning of her action. She spoke because she wanted the public to hear her version. She reorganized her public life. She reduced her official patronages after divorce and focused attention on causes she cared deeply about. In 1997, her work against landmines included visits to Angola and Bosnia, using her worldwide fame to draw attention to the human cost of the weapons. In 1997, she walked through a minefield in Angola wearing protective equipment, using her fame to bring extraordinary attention to the campaign against landmines. There was no sapphire on the front page that mattered more than that image: a princess walking where people had been maimed, a woman whose marriage had dominated headlines using those same headlines to make people look somewhere else. That is authorship. So return now to the table from the beginning. Charles, Camilla, Diana. The ring between them. Now remove the scene. Erase the room. Erase the polished table. Erase the imagined gasp. What remains? A real sapphire ring, a real bracelet Diana said Charles intended for Camilla. A real marriage, a real separation, a real interview, a real divorce. And a real woman whose public identity eventually grew larger than the role the ring had once announced. The truth is quieter than the viral story, but it cuts deeper. Diana did not have to place the ring in front of them. History placed it somewhere more powerful, on the hand of the next Princess of Wales. Not as proof that Diana's marriage succeeded. It did not. Not as proof that the monarchy had corrected every wound. It had not. But as proof that the object survived while its meaning changed. That blue stone no longer belongs only to the story of Charles and Diana. It belongs to Diana's legacy, a mother, a public figure, a woman who entered the institution believing one story and left it understanding another. And maybe that is the line worth remembering. The ring was never her voice. Diana was. The marriage ended. The title changed. The palace moved forward. Camilla eventually took a place beside Charles that Diana once occupied. But the archive did something the institution could not fully control. It preserved Diana speaking, it preserved the photographs, it preserved the contradictions, it preserved the uncomfortable timeline, and it preserved enough evidence that we do not need to invent a final act of defiance for her. Her real life already contained one. That is also why remembrance requires restraint. Diana was photographed endlessly, interpreted endlessly, and often spoken for by people who claimed to know what she felt. Turning every symbolic object into a secret confrontation risks repeating the same mistake in a different direction. The more respectful approach is harder. Keep the verified object, keep the verified words, and admit when the archive falls silent. Silence does not weaken the story. Sometimes it reveals its shape. In Diana's case, what can be proved is already powerful enough to survive without embellishment or invented royal drama. Not the sound of a ring striking a table, the sound of Diana finally describing her own reality. That was what happened next. And decades later, people are still listening.